Okay, I think we're good. Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this breakout session. We're just about to get started. My name is Graham Mackay. I'm the CEO of Generation Digital. Generation Digital's a gold partner of Kore, based out of London in England. And today's session, we're going to be talking about complying with the new era, security and privacy frameworks for conversational AI. I'd like to introduce my colleague, Matthew. Matthew, do you want to do a quick introduction?
Certainly. Hi all. So it's Matt Wymark. Good to meet you all. I hope you've enjoyed the day so far. So what we'll do is we've got some materials to go through today. A few slides, about 12 or 13 slides. But what I'd like to do is keep it quite interactive as well. So if you've got any questions, I'll stop and we can go through them. Because yeah, it's quite a big topic. So I'll try not to make it too heavy. I think that's try and keep the right balance. So just very quickly, we will be talking about the GDPR today, which has been around for some years now. It's important to note that neither Graham nor myself are lawyers. We're not attorneys. We're not data protection officers. So what we're going to discuss with you is it's to serve as kind of our learnings, our experiences, cuts and bruises, if you like, as well. I think that's appropriate from what we've experienced through working through some of our clients. By way of introduction, and my background, so I've spent about 25 years working for banks, financial services, and large-scale transformation initiatives in various types of infrastructure roles. More recently, as the head of cloud at a very large global bank, Microsoft Azure, and then after that, for another large financial institution, doing a conversational AI, conversational banking transformation initiative across somewhere in the region of about 22 markets, in about 7 or 8 different languages. In fact, it might be more than that. And then after that, I was asked to establish a privacy and trust function for a SaaS company. So that's kind of relevant to what we're talking about here today. Okay, a quick recap on the GDPR. It's a landmark piece of legislation. It was the first of its kind for privacy in the landscape. It came into effect in 2016, May 2016, and then was enforceable in May 2018. So it's been around for 6 years now, almost. It gives additional rights for individual privacy, but it's fair to say the GDPR is kind of the highest bar in the land. Through its adoption, it has changed, but it's starting to impact the global privacy landscape. So you're seeing its adoption across many other countries and across US states as well. I think it's currently, actually, I think it's about 15 different states that are adopting. You've got the CCPA, which is the first one, but I think it's about 15 other states that are currently working with or implementing their own version of a privacy framework. Okay. Okay. So what I want to do is just talk a little bit about some of the challenges that we've seen. This isn't exhaustive, so if there are others that you want to raise, please do so, and we can go sort of into more depth as we progress through some of these. So the first one is compliance complexity. That comes back to what we were just talking about, which is the landscape. It's ever evolving. There's been a significant amount of change in the past 2 to 3 years, and that's going to continue. You've got the US Privacy Shield, which was designed to complement the GDPR. That came into effect, I think it was 2018, and it was then challenged in 2020 by a chap called Maximilian Schrems, who's an Austrian lawyer cum activist who took, at the time, Facebook, now Meta, to court in Ireland through the way that Facebook were sharing data between the EU and the US. The outcome of that was it invalidated the US Privacy Shield, and that kind of sent everybody back, and it left a lot of organizations in this kind of hanging state, not knowing what to do. Since then, the Privacy Shield has been replaced. It's called the DPF. It came into effect last year, in July last year. So we're coming up on its first anniversary. The Data Privacy Framework, which is designed to complement the transfer of data, the data sharing between the EU and the US, which is a good thing. But this whole landscape continues to change. It continues to evolve. Sorry, I clicked on the wrong slide there. So managing compliance complexity is key, and that's not going to stop at all. In terms of some of the other aspects here, I'll talk about data mapping, data mapping is understanding your data. So it's about where do you store, where do you process personally identifiable information or sensitive information. Which is a requirement of the GDPR. You have to record it, you have to maintain it. It is a requirement. It's one of the first things that if you are audited by the regulator, the first thing that they will ask for is your data mapping, which is called a record of processing activities, or a ROPA. And within that ROPA, it captures certain information. So it's the data, what data are you capturing, why are you capturing that data, why are you processing it, what are you doing with it, what is the data that you're actually capturing. So is it names, telephone numbers, social security numbers, etc. So it's an assessment that has to be maintained, and it tracks the movement of all of the PII, not just within the bounds of the organisation, but also to its third parties, to its suppliers as well. So it's what systems is it at rest, and where is it transferred to, and then what technical controls do you have. So this is quite complex to implement. You have to do it not just from you have to do it from your own company perspective within the EU, but also for all of your customers. So that's it's quite a significant undertaking. Then you've got the data protection by design, which is now called PBD, really, which is privacy by design, or privacy by design by default. So this is there are certain aspects within here that are vital to the GDPR. One being data storage. So right now, if you are processing data for European, UK, when I say European, I mean European and UK, by the way, just for completeness, because there was a separation there. But for data storage has to remain within the EU or UK. That's really important, and that data can only be accessed by personnel that are also within the EU, UK, or the wider EEA, or whitelisted countries. It gets a little bit complex there, because there are whitelisted countries as well, which are countries that have the same level of data adequacy as the GDPR. So, for example, New Zealand is a compliant country, Australia isn't, Israel is, Japan is, South Korea is, but the US relies on the data, the DPF, but it gets quite complex there. And that has a material impact on how you support a platform. So where are you going to supply these resources? So if there's any access to any PII data, then they're not allowed to have that access. Encryption keys as well, I mean, that goes hand in hand with data storage, but encryption and decryption keys also need to be stored within the EU, EU, UK, and not accessible from outside, so no copies of keys outside as well. All of this has a operational impact as well. It can be quite significant for organizations. Data retention, this one's still remains quite a key friction point, and this is one that we've got lots of experience with working with clients in the EU. So data retention, it's kind of, why are you retaining that data? What's your reason? What's your legitimacy for retaining that data? And you have to have that as that's a key component, one of the articles of the GDPR. How long are you going to keep the data? Sorry, I clicked again. how long you maintain that data, and this comes down to when we talk about the processes and controllers under GDPR for an organisation. If they are, when they're working with their customers, then they have to be very transparent about how long they are keeping the data and for what purpose. And that's all part of that data retention. Now, if you take a bank, for example, they have these policies, their privacy notices, but they will, and they will say that they retain data for a certain period of time. If that's out of sync, it can be quite complex. So typically what banks like to do is have some kind of, or any organisation will specify what their retention policy is based on the need to retain that data. That can be, if you don't have that flexibility to change that, then you have to update all of your own policies and then be transparent back with all of your customers to say, actually, we've changed that. That's why we've had to change it. So this is something we're seeing from a lot of software solutions right now. It's very, it does cause quite a lot of friction. And every organisation has their own take because there isn't a predefined standard under the GDPR. It's not like you must retain data for 10 years. It's for how long you need to, from a data minimization perspective. What's the least amount of time? So it's kind of the inverted, it's the opposite. Then we've got vendors. So this is another big one, vendor management. So if you're, as we spoke about under the data mapping, the ROPers, it's, as part of that, it captures your third parties and the vendors that you use. And there's a specific term called sub-processors. And sub-processors are vendors that you use that will process PII or SPI data on your behalf. So if you go to any tech company now, you will see that the list of sub-processors is available. And sub-processors is a definition specifically for EU, for the GDPR. But you have to call out who these sub-processors are. So there's extra due diligence that you have to perform, and you have to be transparent around who these vendors are, or these sub-processors, why you are using them, for what purpose. The next point, technology, flexibility and scalability. This has been a theme, actually, throughout this week. But it's really acknowledging that it needs to be, you need to be able to adapt as part of the GDPR and any new regulations, and also the technological advances that are happening right now. For example, you may have heard that there's a new act called the EU AI Act. That's just been announced. I think it was the 13th of March. It comes into law, I think in mid-June, something like that. But that's going to change the landscape again, and that's going to demand even more controls around how we the privacy and the security around the AI that's used, and there's certain categories of AI usage as well. And then another point that we constantly come up with is our customers like to know that the software has been audited, it's been validated and certified, and they like to see certain badges. So, for example, ISO 27001, PCI DSS if you're using payments, for example, healthcare, HIPAA, and there are many others as well. So there's an expectation that you will have these, because that's conforming to a framework of how you manage your data, your security, your technology, your estate. Consequences for getting it wrong. This is an interesting one. So the GDPR and fines, you've probably heard of a few cases, but there are a few repeat offenders out there. I think Meta were fined a few times, but there was I think there was another case last year, May last year, where they were fined, and it was quite significant. I don't know if anybody's heard of that case, but it's or the size of the fines, but They're getting quite substantial. I think it was 1.3 billion, the fine last year, on top of 3 or 4 fines prior to that as well. So they're starting to hurt. So this is why this is all called into focus, and this is why it's even more important. And that's why we're working with clients in the EU and UK. That's why this is, you can't get it wrong. Well, that's the consequence. And these fines are going to increase as well. So the fines under the EU AI Act, this is quite interesting. They increase from, I think it's current 3% of global turnover to 7% of global turnover, or 35 million euros. And it's whichever is greater, not less. So, but it's quite significant. Okay, so working with Core. Let's now talk about, shift gears, about how Core approach this and some of the challenges that we've spoken about. So they have a dedicated privacy and trust function. That's really important, and that's an expectation. They have a very high bar in terms of adopting security frameworks. So you'll see NIST up there. They've also got a number of certifications, and this is very significant actually. So yes, ISO 27001, yes HIPAA, yes PCI DSS, SOC 2 Type 2, and they're currently seeking FedRAMP as well, authorization. So this is by far this is a pretty exhaustive list of certifications that are maintained on the Core platform. There's also and this is something I've learned more about this week, getting into the weeds. Their approach to their responsible AI framework and guardrails. I don't know if anybody's seen the earlier sessions around the Gen AI RAG sessions at all, where they start to talk about. But this was really interesting. So a lot of these, the principles around responsible AI are now starting to be baked in. So you've got fairness, you've got transparency, you've got accountability, you've got privacy, you've got security. These are all baked in. And whilst I haven't done the analysis, it's interesting because these are all called out as part of the EU AI Act. And people aren't there yet. It's only just been released. But this already puts Core a long way ahead in terms of having this framework, a responsible AI framework in place, and focusing on these key areas. That's thematic with the EU AI Act. Okay, so if we go back to the challenges we spoke about earlier in the presentation, I just want to give you the one-to-one mapping, as it were, between the two and how that relates to Core, because it's quite interesting. It's very interesting. It's very different, which in a good way. The first one is the versatility of the deployment. I haven't seen this previously, and this is something that actually, working with financial institutions, this is something that resonates with them. So you've got options for your type of deployment. You've got a traditional SaaS model, or you can use your own cloud environment, supported on AWS, Azure, or Google, the 3 main cloud providers. Now that's actually quite unique as in terms of a proposition, and something that pretty much every bank right now has gone on their own cloud journey, now consuming one of those 3 or multiple as part of their strategy. But that's great because they're already comfortable. They've got all their security, their controls, their framework. They have their own teams that manage that and they invest quite heavily. So being able to take the Core offering and put that within your own is actually something that's of huge benefit. Because what it means is you've already got a level of certainty, and you've got Core that are then only maintaining the binaries for their platform. But more importantly, and the bit that kind of sets them apart, is there is then no access to any PII data, any personally identifiable information, which is where you want to be. There is no way, there's no access. So that takes out a lot of the previous headaches when we talk about ropers and where the data's moving around and who's got access to the data, for example. Any questions?
Yeah. For the last 2 days, I would curious about the term, private share environment. Can you explain to me what's the difference between a private environment and a private share? What are we sharing there? And today we're talking about, trying to protect our environment to separate from the other, because we in the healthcare business, we can't share a certain data. So if you have a chance, and then you say here's the customer data that I know access to it, but in what sense that when we try to fitting the platform with the customer data, and when and how are we protecting them versus exposed to the network?
Yeah, sure. I'll try and answer the question. It might go off in different directions, so let me try. In terms of the deployment model, the deployment that you choose that's right for your organization. In that situation, if you're already using your own cloud, AWS or whatever, then you're using resources that are assigned within your cloud environment, not to Core. Does that make sense? So you are then, the data sits within your, depending on cloud technology, your tenant. So you have complete control over that. Core have no access to it. They run the engine, they run the binaries. They don't have access to the database. The database sits with you.
Is it to the pipe, let's say VPN, or what? What is in between there?
Oh, okay. So actually when you deploy the binaries in.
Right.
Yeah. There'll be a number of calls from the platform. The actual mechanism for how that does that, we'll probably need to break that one out separately. But because there is a very detailed architecture diagram, which I can share with you.
So that's a 9-yard difference. Okay, thank you.
But there is a document that explains that, and it also explains the options around and then this is also a benefit of the platform, but the BCP, the DR models, because you can select different models as well, based on the microservices that are consumed.
So the term private share and then private, what's the difference there? The private share means the performance may be impacted, or anything that along with the word private share.
Private.
Sharing it. Or you share it with a different domain, but resources.
No, the resources come from the resources are the resources that are part of your tenant within your cloud environment. Yeah, that's fine. I've got a paper I can share with you, so I'll come talk to you afterwards about that. Any other questions? Okay, and then if we I'll talk to this. The data access, I think I've already covered actually. The great thing here is that the data access, well, it's quite straightforward. Core don't have the access. That's great. That's utopia. They manage the code. They manage the code base. All data is ring fenced and accessible only to the customer, to the organisation. Oh, and the important thing here is the logging. I should mention that. That's something we've seen a lot of, where you get PII that's captured, phone numbers, IP addresses, a number of things within the logs. So that doesn't exist either as part of the logging. For the infrastructure logging sits with Core, but the actual logging for the interaction sits within the customer's domain. This is another key. This is for those that are from regulated or highly regulated organisations. So key management is another pardon the pun, key concern. But the encryption keys, again, it supports a model that's BYOK. So through the deployment models, you can manage your own keys, which is what a lot of, again, I'm going to pull this back to banks, I'm afraid, but banks, gambling, energy, regulated organisations, that's what they expect. So again, that's another key benefit. Data masking. This one I really like. So this is already baked into the platform. It's already there. And there's some great documentation around it, actually. So it's already there. It's available. It's been there for some time. The bit that kind of takes it on steroids for me, I don't know if anybody saw the Gen AI and RAG session a couple of days ago. But they were discussing actually about when you do interact with a Gen AI provider, for example, OpenAI through Azure, which goes through cognitive services, the way it works traditionally is that the data will be passed across through Azure, across to OpenAI, and it's what's called ephemeral, so it doesn't actually reside there, but it's being processed. So it's still a processor because it could be taking, or will be taking PII data through it, through that pipe. The interesting thing here, and I haven't seen this yet, but this is from anybody else actually, the interesting thing here, what Kore have done is actually they're actually stripping that out. So before it leaves the environment, they're masking out that PII, so it goes into, in this case, OpenAI. It will fulfill the request and then come back in. But it's already stripped it of any PII, SPI. I think that's going to be a trend. I think that's something that others are going to want to do as well. Very impressed by that, actually. I thought it's a very good feature and something that's likely to get something that's likely to be a requirement in the EU AI Act as well, based on the interpretation that I've seen. Oh, we did that one. Data retention, deletion, RTBF. RTBF stands for right to be forgotten. Again, this is for EU data subjects. They can request their data be removed. The data retention we talked about, and this is a key friction point, is kind of that variable data retention is what brands, what organizations are asking for. Again, the Kore platform supports that. It's available there now. I think by default it's 7 years, but you can change that to whatever your policy is stipulated, which is fantastic, and that's one of the key things that we've observed through working with our clients in the EU. It also supports APIs so you can delete data. So that's all part and parcel of it as well, to fulfill RTBF requests, right to be forgotten. And that can also be used, that same API, and this is something that we've seen where traditionally some organizations, back to banks I'm afraid, they would like to retain the data for a longer period of time for their own records keeping. So I think in the US it's 10 years. UK it tends to, I think it's 7 years. Germany's 10 as well, I think. But this gives you the ability to be able to ingest that into your own data warehouse. So typically what we see some of our clients do is they will use that API feature to take the data out. So the data retention policy may be only 3 months, but what they're doing is they're taking that out and bringing it in-house to their own data lake, data storage, which this will support. Any questions?
Yeah, so if you're ingesting data via voice and then provide PI information within voice, cataloging or transcripts data, does it automatically mask that as part of the conversation, or does that got to be done on the back end?
That's a really good question. I'm afraid not one I can answer. So I'll have to find an answer to that one.
Because if you have an API for deleting the data, the conversation point would be that the data I don't want in the database, or I need to go back and retroactively mask it.
Yes. Yeah. No, I get where that's coming from. Yeah, that's we'd need to bring somebody into that conversation, but I'll take that one away.
I asked a question on that too when it was related to international, because addresses and other things might be equal in every country,
But and that's true. And there isn't. I don't think there's not a generic. It is customizable, which is great. But once you've got one, you can reuse it. So it's kind of it can still be. I get where you're going. There isn't kind of a templated one for everywhere. I think that's what the response that we heard earlier in the week. But the voice one, yeah, I'm not sure. I'll have to check on that one. Yeah.
Sorry, you were asking with voice in the transcription summary, if it reapplies the GDPR thing, with an echo out.
So if I'm a customer service rep and I'm doing voice, and I ask for your ID.
Oh, okay. So it goes attached to make sure it doesn't just, personal information back.
It doesn't transcribe it and stick it in the database.
And that brings me to the last slide, actually. It's kind of a summary of the core platform. And the first point is that it is a platform, which is great. So it's not a point solution. I think if there's one thing that we've seen this week is actually that's continuing to increase in terms of the proposition. It does have the security, privacy by design, by default principles already baked in. I had conversations earlier in the week with some of the leads, and that's fantastic. That's where everybody needs to get to. So it's great that they have that at a foundational level already. I'm not going to read through all of these. The compliance to the highest industry standards, again, that's the most certifications. The certifications they've achieved, the responsible AI framework with the guardrails, again, that's great. They're already way ahead in terms of the EU AI Act, so that's really positive. Like I said, I don't think it's conclusive, because I don't think there's any organisation in the world yet that's got to that level. It'll take a year or two to bed in. It's an extensible platform, which you can see here from the wheel, the diagram here, in terms of the integrations that they support. I think they spoke about that's going to increase again. I think this year, I think they're adding sort of 50 more or something, and the ability to be able to create your own as well. So I think that's fantastic. Oh, I've lost the slide, sorry. And then we come on to the Gen AI, RAG, and Gale. The use cases around the RAG and the Gen AI features that they built in, personally, is kind of the innovation that's happening right now on the platform is super impressive. Gale as well, in terms of the use case for Gale. I know it's available now in beta, but I haven't seen anybody else getting close to any of this. So it's great that actually they continue to innovate at that speed, because and the optionality it gives you around being able to bring in your own integrations. And that all kind of encapsulates the platform. I think it's great with the XO11 platform that you can now see it's very visible. And that's my deck. Any other questions? It is quite a big topic, so I can carry on. I don't mind.
So you're using third-party LLM to do something different, like create a PDF for Core to process it. Is this connection to the third-party LLM are out of the scope of the Core governance?
Yeah, there's it's Satish and they're around this week. That's a good question for them, because I think they covered that off on, I think it was 2 days ago, there was a session dedicated to that. So I don't know the answer to that, I'm afraid, but we need to go and speak to them. Thank you.